My dad gave the car I paid for to my deadbeat cousin, telling me I earn enough to buy another one. So I just reported it stolen and went to the DMV the next morning to sort out the title. The clerk at the counter looked at my ID, typed in my name, and then turned pale as she called for a supervisor. The supervisor quietly informed me that I could not report the car stolen because, according to a notarized affidavit signed by my father and a $500 processing fee, I had been legally declared dead 6 months ago. My cousin Kyle, listed as my only living relative, was simply collecting the assets from my estate, starting with the car. The supervisor slid a manila folder across the counter. Inside were documents bearing my father's signature alongside a notary seal that looked disturbingly legitimate. My death certificate cited accidental drowning during overseas travel. I'd never left the country. Kyle's contact information filled every beneficiary line. The car title transfer was just one of 7 asset claims pending in the probate system. My savings account, my investment portfolio, the rental property I'd bought at 24, even my grandmother's engagement ring that Dad kept in his safe, all being systematically funneled to Kyle while I stood there, very much breathing, watching my entire financial life get dismantled by people who were supposed to protect me. I grew up believing family meant something. Dad raised me alone after Mom died when I was 12. He taught me to work hard, save aggressively, and never depend on anyone. I followed that advice religiously. While Kyle bounced between jail stints and failed pyramid schemes, I built a career in pharmaceutical sales, earning commissions that let me buy my first BMW at 26. Dad seemed proud then. He'd show my car off to neighbors, brag about my salary at family dinners, but somewhere along the way, his pride curdled into something else. Kyle started showing up more often, always with sob stories about legal fees or rent or whatever scheme had collapsed that month. Dad always helped him, always told me to chip in too, because family takes care of family. I refused after Kyle stole my laptop and pawned it. That refusal apparently was unforgivable. The DMV supervisor suggested I contact a lawyer immediately. I walked out to the parking lot where my BMW should have been and found an empty space with a small oil stain. Kyle had taken it from my driveway 3 days ago while I was on a business trip. Dad called me that evening to say he'd lent it to Kyle because the boy needs reliable transportation for job interviews. When I protested, Dad hit me with that line about earning enough to buy another one. I told him to return my car within 24 hours or I'd report it stolen. He laughed, said I was being selfish, said Kyle needed the help more than I needed a status symbol. I should have seen this coming. 6 months ago, Dad asked me to sign some papers he claimed were for updating his will. He said he wanted to make sure I was protected if anything happened to him. The notary came to his house. I signed where Dad pointed, trusting him because he was my father. I never read the fine print. Never imagined he'd use my signature to declare me legally deceased. The life insurance policy I didn't know existed listed Kyle as the sole beneficiary. $25,000 paid out immediately upon proof of death. My death. Kyle wasn't clever enough to orchestrate this alone. Dad planned every detail. The timing aligned perfectly with my 3-week business conference in Seattle, ensuring I wouldn't notice the initial filings. They'd already liquidated my savings account by forging my signature on withdrawal slips. My investment broker accepted a death certificate as sufficient proof to begin transferring assets to Kyle's name. The rental property was in escrow, pending final sale approval. They'd even filed paperwork to claim my 401k, 15 years of disciplined saving, eliminated in 6 months by 2 people who'd contributed nothing to my success. The bank manager initially refused to believe I was alive. She kept comparing my face to the photo on my ID, as if checking for subtle differences that might prove I was an imposter. Security footage showed Kyle entering my safety deposit box 2 weeks prior, removing the jewelry and coin collection I'd inherited from Mom. Dad accompanied him, using a power of attorney document that shouldn't have existed. They cleaned me out methodically, room by room, account by account. Kyle posted photos on social media wearing Mom's vintage Rolex, standing beside my BMW, living in what he captioned as, "finally getting what I deserve." 63 people liked the post. 12 commented congratulations. I spent that first day gathering evidence, transaction records, forged signatures, security footage from 3 different banks, screenshots of Kyle's social media posts celebrating his sudden wealth, text messages from Dad telling me to let it go and stop being vindictive when I confronted him. He actually used the word vindictive, as if I was the villain for wanting my stolen life back. My attorney reviewed everything and told me prosecution was possible but slow. The legal system would take months, maybe years. They'd already spent or hidden most of the liquid assets. Even if I won every case, recovery would be partial at best. But I didn't call my attorney to file lawsuits. I called him because I needed very specific documents prepared very quickly. Documents that required careful legal language and precise notarization. Documents that wouldn't make sense until much later, when Dad and Kyle finally understood who they'd tried to bury. Dad called that evening. His voice slurred from the whiskey he drank every night since retirement. He said Kyle needed more money for transitional expenses. Said I should wire $5,000 because it was my family obligation. I asked him how a dead person was supposed to wire money. He laughed, told me to stop being dramatic. Said the whole thing could be straightened out if I just cooperated and stopped making problems for Kyle. He actually believed I'd roll over and let them keep everything they'd stolen. I told him I needed to see him and Kyle together tomorrow morning. Said I had paperwork that needed signatures from both of them. Dad agreed immediately, probably assuming I was surrendering. He suggested meeting at his house, the same house where I'd signed my own death certificate 6 months ago without knowing it. I suggested somewhere more appropriate, somewhere with witnesses. I arrived at the county courthouse 30 minutes early. The building's marble floors echoed with footsteps from attorneys and clerks moving between courtrooms. I'd chosen the main lobby deliberately, a space where every conversation happened under fluorescent lights and security cameras. Dad and Kyle shuffled through the metal detector at 9:45, Kyle wearing my mother's Rolex on his wrist like a trophy. He'd gained weight since the last family dinner, his face puffy from whatever he'd been drinking with my money. Dad looked smaller somehow, his shoulders hunched inside a jacket that used to fit properly. They spotted me near the information desk. Kyle grinned, that same smirk he'd worn at 12 when he'd broken my science project and blamed the dog. Dad's expression was harder to read, somewhere between irritation and nervousness. I waved them over to the bench where I'd spread out a leather portfolio. Kyle sat down heavily, already bored. Dad remained standing, arms crossed. "This better be quick," Dad said. "Kyle's got a car appointment." "My car appointment," I corrected, "in my BMW. With the custom leather interior I saved 8 months to afford." Kyle shrugged. "It's mine now. Dad gave it to me." "Dad gave you a lot of things. We should talk about that." I opened the portfolio and removed a stack of documents. "I've been reviewing the paperwork you filed. Very thorough. The death certificate was particularly creative. Accidental drowning in Bali, even though my passport shows I've never been to Indonesia." Dad's jaw tightened. "You signed those papers voluntarily." "I signed what you told me was a will update, not a declaration of death, not a power of attorney, not a beneficiary designation for life insurance I didn't know existed." I slid one document across the bench. "This is interesting, though. You collected $25,000 from MetLife 3 weeks after filing the death certificate. That's insurance fraud." Kyle's grin faltered. Dad snatched the paper, scanned it, then threw it back at me. "You can't prove anything." "Actually, I can prove everything. The notary who witnessed my signature, she remembers you telling her it was estate planning documents. She kept notes. She'll testify that you deliberately misrepresented what I was signing." I removed another sheet. "And this is my favorite part. You claimed my 401k as part of the estate, but 401k accounts have mandatory beneficiary designations that supersede wills and death certificates. I designated my college roommate as beneficiary 7 years ago. She received a very interesting call from Fidelity last week, asking her to verify her claim to my retirement account." Dad's face drained of color. Kyle looked confused, still not understanding how badly they'd miscalculated. My college roommate Sarah had called me immediately when Fidelity contacted her. She'd stayed on the line while I explained everything, then agreed to play along with whatever I needed. Her statement to Fidelity's fraud department had triggered an automatic investigation. Every document Dad filed was now under federal review. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "Every asset you stole is going to be returned. The BMW, the savings account, the investment portfolio, Mom's jewelry, all of it." Kyle laughed. "Too late. Already spent most of it." "On what?" "Let me guess. The 75-inch television you posted on Instagram? The weekend in Vegas? The dirt bike that's currently parked in Dad's garage?" I pulled out my phone and showed them screenshots of every purchase Kyle had broadcast to social media. "I've cataloged everything. Every dinner, every bottle, every stupid impulse buy. My attorney estimates you've burned through $42,000 in 6 months." "So what?" Kyle's voice rose. "You can't get back money that's already gone." No, but I can get a judgment for the full amount, plus interest, plus penalties for fraud. The court will garnish your wages for the next 20 years. I looked at Kyle directly. Except you don't have wages, do you? You haven't held a job for more than 3 months in your entire adult life. So the court will seize any future assets, any inheritance, any lottery winnings, any money that ever passes through your hands until the debt is satisfied. Dad stepped closer. You'd really do that? To family? You declared me legally dead, stole everything I worked 15 years to build, posted my mother's jewelry on social media like party favors. Yes, I'd really do that. A security guard glanced our way. Dad noticed and lowered his voice. What do you want? I want everything returned by Monday. Car, jewelry, liquid assets. Whatever you spent gets repaid on a payment plan my attorney will provide. You'll sign affidavits admitting the fraud. You'll cooperate with every investigation. And you'll never contact me again. Kyle stood up. Or what? Or I file criminal charges. Insurance fraud is a federal offense. Identity theft, forgery, wire fraud for the electronic transfers. Dad's looking at 5 to 10 years. You're looking at similar time, plus probation violations from your last conviction. I pulled out another document. I already filed a police report. Detective Morrison is expecting my call by noon today. Whether I make that call depends on what happens in the next 2 minutes. Dad grabbed Kyle's arm before he could respond. They moved several feet away, whispering harshly. Kyle kept gesturing angrily. Dad kept shaking his head. A clerk walked past, pushing a cart of file boxes. A lawyer in an expensive suit argued with someone on his phone. The courthouse lobby continued its normal rhythm while my father and cousin debated whether to accept consequences or gamble on my mercy. They returned to the bench. Dad's hands trembled slightly. We'll return what we can. Everything. Not what you can. Everything. The car's in Kyle's name now. The title transfer is legal. The title transfer is fraudulent because it was based on a forged death certificate. The DMV is already processing the reversal. Kyle can surrender the car voluntarily or have it repossessed by sheriff's deputy. His choice. Kyle's face flushed. This is bullshit. This is consequences. I stood and gathered my portfolio. You have until Monday. My attorney will contact you this afternoon with instructions. Miss one deadline and I proceed with criminal charges. Dad reached for my arm. I stepped back. Don't. Rebecca, please. We can work this out. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't commit fraud. Family doesn't declare their daughter dead to give her life to a deadbeat cousin. I looked at both of them. You made your choices. Now live with them. I walked toward the exit. Behind me, Kyle started shouting something about being disrespected. A security guard moved in his direction. Dad's voice pleaded for him to calm down. I pushed through the heavy doors into morning sunlight and didn't look back. My phone rang before I reached my rental car. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. I answered. They took the bait? She asked. Every word. They think returning the assets makes this go away. And the other thing? Already in motion. Dad's bank received the subpoena this morning. Kyle's storage unit gets searched tomorrow. I unlocked the rental and slid into the driver's seat. They have no idea what's coming. Sarah laughed. Remind me never to cross you. You never stole my car and declared me dead, so you're safe. I started the engine. How's the paperwork on your end? Notarized and filed. Your new LLC is official as of yesterday. All assets transferred correctly. Everything they didn't steal. The rental property's now owned by Donovan Holdings. My investment accounts are under the corporate umbrella. Even if they tried this again, they'd be stealing from a business entity, which carries heavier penalties. Smart. What about the life insurance? I smiled. That's the best part. Dad didn't know I had a second policy through my employer. $250,000 with Sarah Brennan as the sole beneficiary. When MetLife's investigation concludes that I'm alive, they'll demand repayment of the fraudulent claim. But here's the thing about insurance companies. They don't just want their money back. They prosecute. Jesus, Rebecca. They declared me dead, Sarah. They tried to erase me. I'm just making sure they understand what happens when you bury someone who's still breathing. The BMW appeared in my driveway Monday morning at 6:15. Kyle left it running with the keys on the driver's seat, probably hoping to avoid a face-to-face confrontation. I watched from my living room window as he climbed into a beat-up Honda Civic that Dad drove. They didn't knock on my door, didn't leave a note. Just surrendered the car and disappeared before sunrise. I walked outside and circled the BMW slowly. Kyle had put 8,000 miles on it in 3 days. The interior reeked of cigarettes and spilled beer. Fast food wrappers covered the back seat. Someone had scratched a crude insult into the leather passenger seat with what looked like a house key. I documented everything with my phone camera, then called my detail service. They'd restore the interior by Wednesday. The scratched leather would cost Kyle an additional $1,200. My attorney called at 8. They returned the jewelry this morning, dropped it at my office in a shoebox. I'm looking at it now. Your mother's Rolex is missing. Kyle was wearing it at the courthouse. Then he needs to produce it by end of business today, or we file a police report for possession of stolen property. I'll send him a message. Papers rustled in the background. The bank confirmed they've frozen both accounts pending investigation. Your father tried to withdraw $15,000 on Friday. The teller flagged the transaction as suspicious given the circumstances. He left without the money. How much is left in his account? $4,200. Everything else went to Kyle or got spent. Your father's pretty much broke. I felt nothing hearing that. No satisfaction, no guilt. Just a cold recognition that he'd gambled everything on a plan that required my permanent silence. What about the investment portfolio? Being returned to your name. The brokerage is cooperating fully. They're horrified this happened under their watch. Expect a formal apology and probably some kind of settlement offer to avoid a lawsuit. He paused. Rebecca, I have to ask, how far are you planning to take this? What do you mean? The criminal charges. The fraud investigation. You've got them cornered. They're returning everything. Is prosecution really necessary? I sat down on my couch. Through the window, I could see my neighbor's daughter leaving for school, backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Normal morning, normal life. Everything I'd almost lost because two men decided I was worth more dead than alive. They didn't just steal money. They tried to erase my existence. They filed paperwork declaring me deceased. They claimed my mother's jewelry. They liquidated accounts I'd spent 15 years building. And they did all of it while knowing I was alive, knowing I'd eventually find out, and believing I'd be too weak or too forgiving to fight back. So that's a yes on prosecution. That's a yes on consequences. I want them to understand that actions have prices, that you can't destroy someone's life and walk away because you said sorry and returned some of what you stole. My attorney sighed. I'll proceed with the filings. Detective Morrison wants to interview you this week. The insurance company's investigator also requested a meeting, and the IRS might get involved since your father didn't report the life insurance payout as income. The IRS? $25,000 is taxable income. He spent it without declaring it. That's tax evasion on top of insurance fraud. The penalties are substantial. I smiled. Schedule everything. I'll make time. I spent Monday afternoon at the DMV correcting my legal status. The clerk who'd originally helped me looked relieved to see me alive. She processed the title transfer reversal and issued new registration documents. The death certificate got flagged for investigation. According to state law, falsifying a death certificate carried penalties including prison time and fines up to $50,000. The clerk explained this carefully, watching my face for a reaction. I thanked her for the information. Tuesday brought my mother's jewelry back to me. My attorney delivered the shoebox to my office. Inside, wrapped in newspaper, were the pieces I'd inherited when Mom died, her engagement ring, the pearl necklace from her grandmother, the gold bracelet Dad bought her on their 10th anniversary, everything except the Rolex. I texted Kyle directly for the first time since the courthouse meeting. You have until 6 p.m. to return my mother's watch. After that, I file theft charges. He responded within minutes. Don't have it. You were wearing it Friday. Sold it. Then you have until 6 p.m. to buy it back or produce a receipt showing where you sold it. Your choice. Fuck you. I forwarded the text exchange to my attorney and Detective Morrison. At 4:30, Kyle showed up at my office building's lobby. Security called my extension. I told them to send him up. He stepped out of the elevator looking like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were bloodshot. His clothes hung wrong, wrinkled and stained. I don't have the watch, he said immediately. I pawned it. They gave me $400. My mother's vintage Rolex was worth $6,000 minimum. You pawned it for $400? I needed money. You had my $42,000. You needed more? Kyle's hands curled into fists. You don't understand what it's like. You've always had everything. Good job. Nice car. Money in the bank. Some of us aren't that lucky. My luck had nothing to do with it. I worked 80-hour weeks for 7 years to build my career. I drove a 15-year-old Honda until I could afford something better. I saved aggressively and invested carefully. You made different choices. You chose drugs at 19. You chose theft at 22. You chose unemployment over responsibility every single time someone offered you a chance. Those weren't luck. Those were choices. So now you're going to destroy me because I made mistakes? I'm going to hold you accountable because you tried to destroy me. There's a difference. I crossed my arms. Where did you pawn the watch? Eddie's on 5th Street. Do they still have it? Probably. The redemption period doesn't end until next month. I pulled out my phone and called Eddie's pawn. The owner confirmed they had the Rolex. I paid the $400 redemption fee plus interest over the phone and arranged pickup for tomorrow. Kyle watched this with growing confusion. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. "I'm not helping you. I'm recovering my property. You still owe me $400 plus interest plus the difference between what you received and what the watch is actually worth. My attorney will add it to your payment plan." I gestured toward the elevator. "You can go." "Rebecca, wait. Can we talk about this? Really talk?" "No. I'm family. Doesn't that mean something?" I looked at him directly. "You stopped being family when you cashed that fraudulent insurance check. When you drove my car. When you wore my dead mother's watch. When you participated in erasing my existence for money. Family doesn't do those things, Kyle. Criminals do." His face crumpled. "I'm sorry." "No, you're caught. There's a difference." He left without another word. I watched the elevator doors close and felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction. Just the cold certainty that some people only understand consequences when those consequences become unavoidable. Wednesday morning brought news from Detective Morrison. The investigation had expanded. The notary who'd witnessed my signatures admitted under questioning that Dad had misrepresented the documents. She'd notarized them believing they were estate planning materials. Her testimony provided evidence of intent to defraud. The insurance company was pursuing criminal charges. The district attorney's office was reviewing the case for potential prosecution. My father called that afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. He called again an hour later. Then again. Then again. On the 5th attempt, I answered. "What? Rebecca, please. We need to talk." "We talked at the courthouse. You had your chance to make this right. You chose to minimize it. I didn't understand how serious this was. I thought we could work it out privately. You thought I'd forgive you. Let you keep what you stole. Pretend it never happened. You're my daughter, and you declared me dead. Legally. Officially. You signed documents stating I'd drowned overseas. You collected insurance money. You gave my possessions to Kyle. You did all of this while I was alive and reachable by phone." My voice stayed level. "What exactly did you think would happen when I found out?" Silence on the other end. Then quietly, "I didn't think you'd be this angry." "You didn't think I'd find out at all. That's different." "Kyle needed help. He was desperate. So you sacrificed me, your daughter, the one who actually worked and saved and built something? You erased my existence to fund Kyle's next bender? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Dad? Explain it to me. Make it make sense." More silence. I could hear him breathing. That labored sound he'd developed after years of smoking. Finally, "I can't." "No, you can't. Because there's no explanation that justifies what you did. No story that makes this acceptable. You betrayed me in the deepest way possible. And now you're facing consequences. That's all this is. Consequences. The detective said I might go to prison. Yes. Rebecca, please, I'm your father. No, you're the man who raised me. There's a difference. A father wouldn't do what you did. A father would protect his daughter, not erase her for money. I paused. You made your choice. Now live with it. I hung up. He called back immediately. I blocked his number. My attorney called Thursday with an update. The district attorney is moving forward with charges: insurance fraud, identity theft, forgery. Your father's looking at 3 to 5 years if convicted. Kyle's looking at similar time plus probation violations from his priors. What about restitution? Full restitution plus penalties. The court will order repayment of everything stolen plus interest plus court costs. We're estimating around $90,000 total once everything's calculated. They don't have $90,000. Then they'll be on payment plans for the next 20 years, garnished wages, seized tax refunds, liens on any property they might acquire. The debt doesn't disappear just because they're broke. I thanked him and ended the call. My phone buzzed immediately with a text from an unknown number. "This is Aunt Marie. Your dad told me what happened. You need to stop this. He's family. He's sorry. Please drop the charges." I didn't respond. 3 more texts arrived from different relatives over the next hour, all saying variations of the same thing. Family forgives. Everyone makes mistakes. Don't destroy your father over money. I blocked each number as they appeared. Friday evening, I drove to Eddie's pawn and retrieved my mother's Rolex. The owner placed it in a velvet bag with apologetic care. He'd researched the watch after I called and realized what he'd given Kyle $400 for was worth significantly more. He offered to testify if needed about the transaction. I thanked him and left. At home, I cleaned the watch carefully and placed it in my safe alongside Mom's other jewelry. Everything was back where it belonged. The BMW was detailed and perfect. My accounts were restored, my legal status corrected. Everything physical had been returned. But the real consequences were just beginning. The preliminary hearing happened on a gray Tuesday morning 3 weeks later. I sat in the gallery behind the prosecutor's table, watching Dad and Kyle shuffle into the courtroom in matching orange jumpsuits. They'd been arrested the previous Friday when the grand jury returned indictments on multiple counts of fraud. Neither could make bail. Dad's house was mortgaged beyond its value. Kyle had no assets at all. They'd spent the last 4 days in county jail. Dad looked smaller in the jumpsuit, his hair uncombed and his face unshaven. Kyle kept his eyes down, avoiding looking anywhere near where I sat. Their public defender, a tired-looking woman in a wrinkled suit, spread papers across the defense table with the resignation of someone who knew she was holding a losing hand. The judge entered. We all stood. The bailiff called the case. The People versus Michael Donovan and Kyle Brennan. Charges of insurance fraud, identity theft, forgery, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The prosecutor outlined the case methodically: the fraudulent death certificate, the forged signatures, the insurance claim, the systematic liquidation of my assets. He presented bank records, notary testimony, social media posts, and text messages. Each piece of evidence landed with quiet devastation. The judge's expression hardened as the presentation continued. The defense attorney tried. She argued that Dad was elderly and confused, that Kyle was easily influenced and not the mastermind, that they'd returned everything and shown remorse. The prosecutor countered with premeditation evidence. The notary appointment scheduled weeks in advance. The insurance policy Dad had taken out on me 18 months before filing the death certificate. The storage unit Kyle had rented specifically to hide my mother's jewelry and other items they'd planned to sell slowly over time. That storage unit had been the breakthrough. Detective Morrison obtained a warrant based on Kyle's social media posts showing items that matched descriptions of my missing property. Inside the 10x10 space, investigators found boxes of my possessions. Photo albums from college, my mother's china, the coin collection, even my high school yearbooks. Items with no monetary value but significant emotional weight. They hadn't just stolen my money, they'd tried to steal my history. The judge denied bail reduction. He cited flight risk and the severity of the charges. Dad and Kyle would remain incarcerated pending trial. The defense attorney requested a continuance. The prosecutor objected. The judge set a trial date for 8 weeks out and dismissed the court. I left before Dad or Kyle could see me. Outside the courthouse, news vans lined the street. Somehow the story had leaked. Local reporters were covering it as a human interest piece gone dark. Daughter declared dead by father in fraud scheme. The headlines wrote themselves. A reporter approached me in the parking lot. Ms. Donovan, can we ask you a few questions? No comment. How does it feel to see your father arrested? I stopped walking, turned, looked directly at the camera her videographer was pointing at me. It feels like justice. Next question. Do you regret pressing charges against family? I regret trusting people who saw me as an asset to liquidate rather than a person to love, but I don't regret holding them accountable. Family doesn't give you permission to commit crimes. It gives you more reason not to. Your father's attorney says he's deeply sorry. My father's attorney is doing her job, but sorry doesn't undeclare someone dead. Sorry doesn't return time or trust. Sorry is just a word people use when they're caught. I started walking again. That's all I have to say. The footage aired that evening on 3 local stations. My phone exploded with messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Most were angry. How could I do this to Dad? How could I send my own father to jail? Where was my compassion, my forgiveness, my Christian charity? I responded to none of them. They'd been silent when Dad declared me dead, silent when Kyle wore my mother's watch, silent when my entire life was being stolen and liquidated. Their outrage only appeared when consequences arrived for the perpetrators. Their selective morality wasn't worth engaging. My attorney called Wednesday morning. We got an offer. What kind of offer? Kyle wants to testify against your father in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's claiming your father planned everything, says he was just following orders. Kyle was wearing my mother's watch on social media. He posted pictures with my car. He bragged about finally getting what he deserved. He wasn't following orders. He was participating enthusiastically. I know. The prosecutor knows. But Kyle's testimony could strengthen the case against your father, make conviction certain instead of probable. And Kyle gets what? Probation? 18 months minimum, plus full restitution obligations, plus supervised probation for 5 years after release. He'd have to maintain employment and submit to random drug tests. Any violation means he serves the remainder of your father's sentence in addition to his own. I considered this. Kyle testifying meant Dad couldn't minimize his role, couldn't claim confusion or elderly manipulation, couldn't paint himself as a victim of circumstance. What does the prosecutor recommend? He thinks it's worth it. Your father was the architect. Kyle was the beneficiary. Getting them both convicted serves justice, but getting detailed testimony about the planning and execution serves the broader case. Insurance companies are watching this. They want to see a strong prosecution that deters future fraud. Tell the prosecutor I'll defer to his judgment, whatever serves justice best. Are you sure? Some people might see this as Kyle getting a light sentence. Kyle gets 18 months in prison, 5 years of probation, a permanent felony record, and debt he'll never escape. That's not light. That's his life destroyed in slow motion. And he has to live knowing he betrayed the man who enabled his fraud to save himself. That's its own punishment. My attorney laughed quietly. You've really thought this through. I had a lot of time to think while they were stealing my life. The deal was finalized by Friday. Kyle would plead guilty to reduce charges and testify against Dad in exchange for the 18-month sentence. The news hit the remaining family hard. Aunt Marie called from a number I hadn't blocked yet, screaming about betrayal and loyalty. I let her vent for 30 seconds, then hung up and blocked her too. Dad's trial date got moved up to 4 weeks. With Kyle's testimony, the prosecution wanted to move quickly before defense could develop counter-narratives. I received a subpoena to testify. The prosecutor walked me through what to expect. Defense would try to paint me as vindictive, as a daughter who'd abandoned her struggling father, as someone more concerned with money than family. I needed to stay calm, stick to facts, and let the evidence speak. The trial started on a Monday morning that felt like autumn arriving early. I wore a navy suit and minimal jewelry. My mother's pearl necklace returned from Kyle's shoebox. Nothing else. The courtroom filled with reporters and curious observers. Dad sat at the defense table looking older than his 68 years. His attorney had dressed him in a suit that hung loose on his frame. Prison food and stress had carved weight off him rapidly. Kyle testified on Tuesday. He described how Dad had approached him with the plan 18 months ago, how they'd researched fraudulent death certificates and insurance fraud, how Dad convinced him this was victimless because I had plenty of money and wouldn't really miss it. How they'd celebrated when the first insurance check arrived. How they'd laughed about me being too trusting to read documents carefully. The jury's expressions darkened with each revelation. Defense tried to discredit Kyle on cross-examination, pointing out his criminal history and drug problems. Kyle admitted everything. Yes, he'd been arrested before. Yes, he'd made terrible choices. Yes, he was testifying to reduce his sentence. But none of that changed the facts. Dad had planned this. Dad had executed it. Dad had believed he'd get away with it because I loved him too much to fight back. I testified on Wednesday. The prosecutor asked me to describe my relationship with Dad before the fraud. I explained the trust, the respect, the love that made me sign documents without reading them because he was my father and I believed he'd protect me. I described discovering the death certificate, the systematic theft of my assets, the moment I realized my own father had tried to erase my existence. Defense attorney stood for cross-examination. Ms. Donovan, isn't it true that you refused to help your cousin Kyle when he asked for financial assistance? I refused to give Kyle money after he stole my laptop and pawned it. That's not refusing to help. That's establishing boundaries. But you have a successful career. You could afford to help family members in need. I could afford many things. That doesn't obligate me to fund someone else's irresponsibility. Kyle is 42 years old. He's capable of earning his own money. So you value money more than family? I value honesty more than enabling. And I value my right to exist more than funding someone else's fraud. Your father is 68 years old. He made a mistake. Do you really want to send an elderly man to prison? My father is 68 years old. He deliberately planned and executed a fraud that required months of preparation and multiple criminal acts. His age doesn't excuse that. It makes it worse. He had 68 years to learn that declaring your daughter dead to steal her money is wrong. The defense attorney tried several more angles. Each one fell flat. The evidence was overwhelming. The testimony was damning. By Thursday afternoon, both sides rested. Closing arguments took 2 hours. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Dad showed no emotion when the verdict was read. He simply stared at the table in front of him, while the judge thanked the jury and scheduled sentencing for 3 weeks out. The bailiff led him away in handcuffs. He didn't look at me once. Sentencing day arrived with unexpected sunshine. I sat in the same gallery seat I'd occupied during the trial, watching Dad shuffle into the courtroom for the final time. 3 weeks in county jail had aged him further. His hands shook slightly as he sat at the defense table. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder briefly, a gesture of comfort that looked rehearsed. The judge entered. We stood. The bailiff called the case. The judge reviewed the verdict and pre-sentencing reports. Then he asked if the defendant wished to speak before sentencing. Dad's attorney nodded. Dad stood slowly, gripping the table for support. Your Honor, I made a terrible mistake. I let desperation and poor judgment cloud my thinking. I never meant to hurt my daughter. I thought I was helping family. I know now that what I did was wrong. I'm deeply sorry. I'm asking for mercy, not for myself, but for the chance to make this right with Rebecca. The judge looked at him without expression. Mr. Donovan, you didn't make a mistake. A mistake is adding incorrectly or forgetting an appointment. You planned and executed a sophisticated fraud over 18 months. You filed false legal documents. You committed insurance fraud. You systematically stole from your daughter while maintaining the pretense of normal familial relations. This wasn't poor judgment. This was calculated criminal behavior. He turned to me. Ms. Donovan, would you like to make a victim impact statement? I stood. I'd prepared remarks, but standing there looking at the man who'd raised me and then tried to erase me, the prepared words felt insufficient. I spoke from something deeper. Your Honor, my father taught me that family was everything, that blood meant loyalty, that you protected the people you loved no matter what. I believed him. I organized my entire life around those principles. I worked hard so I could help family when they needed it. I saved aggressively so I'd never be a burden. I trusted completely because that's what family does. When I discovered he'd declared me legally dead, my first thought wasn't anger. It was confusion. I couldn't understand how the man who'd taught me about loyalty could betray me so completely. But I understand now. He didn't betray his principles. He never had principles. He had convenient words he used to manipulate people into serving his needs. He tells you he never meant to hurt me. But hurt was inevitable. You can't declare someone dead and steal their life without hurting them. He tells you he wants to make this right. But he only wants that now because he's facing consequences. When he had the chance to make things right before I discovered the fraud, before I filed reports, before Detective Morrison got involved, he chose to minimize and deflect and blame me for being vindictive. I'm not asking for a specific sentence. That's your job, Your Honor. I'm simply asking that his sentence reflect reality. This wasn't a momentary lapse. This wasn't a mistake. This was a sustained, calculated effort to erase my legal existence and steal everything I'd built. He chose this path knowing full well I was alive and that I'd eventually discover what he'd done. He gambled that I'd love him too much to hold him accountable. He was wrong. I sat down. The courtroom was silent except for muffled crying from someone in the back row. Probably Aunt Marie or another relative who'd decided my father was the victim in all this. The judge reviewed the sentencing guidelines. Mr. Donovan, the court finds that your crimes were particularly egregious due to the breach of familial trust involved. You didn't defraud a stranger or a corporation. You defrauded your own daughter. The person who trusted you most in this world. That aggravating factor weighs heavily. Additionally, the sophistication and duration of your fraud demonstrates clear criminal intent. This wasn't opportunistic. This was planned, executed, and sustained over many months. The court sentences you to 5 years in state prison. You'll be eligible for parole after serving 60% of your sentence. Upon release, you'll serve 3 years supervised probation. You're ordered to pay full restitution in the amount of $87,412, plus interest, plus court costs. This debt is non-dischargeable in bankruptcy. Furthermore, you're permanently prohibited from serving as executor, trustee, or power of attorney for any estate or person. You've demonstrated you cannot be trusted with such responsibility. He brought down his gavel. Bailiff, remand the defendant. Dad stood mechanically. The bailiff approached with handcuffs. As they led him toward the side door, Dad finally looked at me. His eyes held something I couldn't quite identify. Regret? Anger? Disbelief that his daughter had actually let this happen? I met his gaze steadily and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just the quiet certainty that justice had been served. The courtroom emptied slowly. Reporter approached me outside. "Ms. Donovan, how do you feel about the sentence?" "I feel that the judge was fair. My father committed serious crimes. He'll serve an appropriate sentence." "Do you have any message for him?" "No." "Will you visit him in prison?" "No." "Do you think you'll ever reconcile?" I looked directly at the camera. Reconciliation requires both parties to acknowledge wrongdoing and commit to change. My father spent this entire process minimizing his actions and portraying himself as a victim. That's not remorse. That's self-pity. I have no interest in facilitating his emotional comfort while he serves the sentence he earned. That's pretty harsh for someone who's still your father. What's harsh is declaring your daughter dead to steal her money. What's harsh is systematically liquidating her assets while maintaining the pretense of normal family dinners. What's harsh is believing love should excuse crime. I'm not being harsh. I'm being honest. I walked away before she could ask another question. My phone buzzed with text messages from blocked numbers finding new ways to reach me. I ignored them all. The people upset by Dad's sentence were the same people who'd been silent during his crimes. Their opinions held no weight. Kyle's sentencing happened the following week. I didn't attend. According to my attorney, Kyle received his 18 months as agreed, plus 5 years probation, plus full restitution obligations. He'd been transferred to minimum security. He'd probably serve 12 months with good behavior and emerge to a lifetime of debt and restrictions. His criminal record would follow him forever. Every job application, every apartment lease, every background check. He'd carry this the rest of his life. The final restitution hearing determined that Dad's house would be sold to partially satisfy the debt. It would fetch maybe $90,000 after paying off the mortgage and liens. That money would go toward my restitution, though it wouldn't cover everything. The remaining balance would be garnished from any prison wages Dad earned and any income he generated after release. At 68 years old, he'd be 73 when eligible for parole. His earning potential was minimal. He'd die in debt to me. Kyle's restitution obligations would function similarly. Garnished wages for decades. No tax refunds, no lottery winnings, no inheritance. Every dollar that passed through his hands would be subject to seizure until the debt was satisfied. The court had essentially given me ownership of their financial futures. I met with the insurance company's attorney to discuss their civil case. They were pursuing additional damages beyond the criminal restitution. They wanted to make an example of this case to deter future fraud. I agreed to cooperate with their investigation and testify if needed. They thanked me for my diligence in uncovering and reporting the fraud. Apparently, most death certificate fraud goes undetected for years because beneficiaries don't fight back aggressively enough. "You did everything right," the attorney said. "You documented thoroughly. You reported immediately. You didn't try to handle it privately. You let the system work. I wanted consequences, not revenge. Well, you got both." She wasn't wrong. The consequences were substantial and permanent. Dad would lose years of freedom. Kyle would lose his clean slate. Both would lose their financial futures. The family that had enabled or ignored their crimes would lose their comfortable narrative about who the real villain was. And I would lose nothing else because I'd already lost everything I was going to lose the day they filed that fraudulent death certificate. That evening, I sat in my living room with my mother's jewelry spread across the coffee table. Each piece held memories. The engagement ring Dad gave her after 3 months of dating, the pearl necklace her grandmother wore on her wedding day, the gold bracelet commemorating my birth. Mom died believing these items would stay in the family, passed down through generations, carrying stories and love. Dad tried to sell them to fund Kyle's irresponsibility. That betrayal somehow cut deeper than the financial fraud. The money was replaceable. These memories weren't. I placed each piece carefully in the safe, locked it, and sat in the quiet darkness of my home. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. "Rebecca, it's Sarah. Hey, what's up?" I saw the news coverage, the sentencing. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked. Are you okay?" I considered the question honestly. Was I okay? My father was in prison. My cousin was in prison. Half my extended family hated me. The other half pretended I didn't exist. I'd spent 6 months fighting for justice instead of building my career or my life. I'd lost my father and gained only the satisfaction of holding him accountable. "I'm okay," I said finally. "I'm not happy, but I'm okay." "Do you regret it?" "No." "Not even a little?" "Sarah, they declared me dead. They stole everything I'd worked for. They did it knowing I was alive and believing I'd be too weak or too forgiving to fight back. If I'd let that go, What would that say about me? About what I'm willing to accept? About what I think I deserve? It would say you're forgiving. No, it would say I'm a doormat. Forgiveness requires genuine remorse and commitment to change. They showed neither. They showed self-pity and deflection and anger that I had the audacity to hold them accountable. That's not someone deserving forgiveness. That's someone deserving consequences. Sarah was quiet for a moment. You're different now. Harder. No, I'm clearer. I understand now that love doesn't excuse crime. That family doesn't mean unconditional tolerance of abuse. That protecting yourself isn't vindictive. It's necessary. If that makes me harder, I'll accept it. It's better than being the naive woman who signs documents without reading them because she trusts her father. I guess you're right. I am right. And the proof is that I'm still here, with my assets restored and my life intact. They gambled on my weakness and lost. That's not my failure. It's theirs. We talked for another 20 minutes about lighter topics. Work, her new apartment, the vacation she was planning, normal life continuing despite the chaos. When we hung up, I felt lighter. Sarah understood. She'd helped me through this entire process. She'd never once questioned whether I was doing the right thing. I poured a glass of wine and stood at my window overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, Dad was in a cell regretting his choices. Kyle was in a different cell doing the same. Relatives were gathering in living rooms discussing what a cold, unforgiving person I'd become. None of it mattered. I'd protected myself. I'd held criminals accountable. I'd demonstrated that erasing someone's existence carries consequences that don't disappear because you apologize after getting caught. Tomorrow I'd return to work. Next week I'd meet with a financial advisor about reinvesting the restitution funds. Next month I'd take a vacation somewhere warm and forget about fraud and betrayal for a while. My life would continue. Theirs would be permanently diminished. And that was exactly how it should be. 18 months passed like a slow exhale. I rebuilt my life carefully, deliberately, without looking back at the wreckage I'd left behind. The pharmaceutical company promoted me to regional manager. My investment portfolio recovered and grew. I bought a new condo in a building with actual security and neighbors who didn't know my history. The BMW got traded for something less conspicuous. I dated occasionally, but kept people at a careful distance. Trust wasn't something I handed out freely anymore. Dad's house sold for $83,000 after fees and mortgage payoff. The money appeared in my account with a court notation explaining its source. I transferred it immediately to a separate investment account I'd labeled Justice Fund. I didn't want his money mixed with what I'd earned honestly. Let it grow separately. Let it remind me that consequences have financial value. Kyle got released after 14 months for good behavior. My attorney informed me he'd found work at a warehouse making $16 an hour. His wages were being garnished 25% for restitution. At that rate, he'd be paying me for the next 35 years. He'd moved into a studio apartment in the worst part of town. No car, no prospects, no life beyond work and debt and probation check-ins every 2 weeks. I received a letter from him 3 months after his release. The envelope arrived at my office with a prison forwarding stamp. Inside was a single page of notebook paper covered in cramped handwriting. Rebecca, I know you don't want to hear from me. I know I don't deserve your attention. But I need you to know I understand now what we did. Prison gives you a lot of time to think. I thought about how I'd feel if someone did to me what we did to you. I'd be destroyed. I'd never recover. But you did recover. You fought back. You won. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just saying I understand now why you did what you did. You were right. I was wrong. That's all. Kyle. I read it twice, then shredded it. Understanding didn't equal redemption. Remorse didn't erase crimes. He could understand from his studio apartment with his garnished wages and his felony record. Understanding was the least he could do. Dad became eligible for parole after 3 years. The parole board denied him. According to my attorney, who monitored these things, Dad showed insufficient remorse during his hearing. He'd blamed his actions on family pressure and desperate circumstances. The board found his explanations inadequate. They'd review his case again in 18 months. He'd be 71 by then. Maybe he'd figure out that accountability meant accepting responsibility without excuses. Probably not. The relatives who'd called me vindictive slowly faded from my life. Aunt Marie tried reconciliation once, sending a Christmas card with a note saying, "Family should forgive." I sent it back unopened. Uncle Tom called on my birthday 2 years after the trial, suggesting we put all this behind us. I told him I'd put it behind me the day Dad went to prison. He was the one still looking backward. Cousin Jennifer sent a Facebook friend request that I ignored. They'd all chosen their side. I'd simply accepted their choice and moved on. Work became my focus. I led my region to top sales numbers 3 years running. The company sent me to conferences in Miami, Seattle, and Denver. I collected awards and bonuses and the respect of colleagues who knew nothing about my history. I was just Rebecca Donovan, the aggressive closer who never missed quota. They didn't need to know what else I'd closed. I dated occasionally, but never seriously. Men would ask about my family, and I'd give vague answers about being estranged. If they pressed, I'd explain briefly that my father committed fraud against me. Most didn't ask follow-up questions. The ones who did usually revealed themselves as poor prospects. Anyone who thought I should have handled it privately or preserved the relationship despite everything was showing me they valued comfort over justice. I didn't need that energy in my life. Sarah remained my closest friend. She'd married a software engineer and moved to Portland. We talked weekly and visited quarterly. She never questioned my choices, never suggested I reach out to Dad, never implied I was holding grudges. She understood that cutting out cancer wasn't vindictive. It was survival. 4 years after the trial, my attorney called with news. Your father's appealing his restitution order. He's claiming hardship. Hardship? He's 70 now. Says his age and health make it impossible to earn money to pay you back. He wants the court to reduce or eliminate his debt. I laughed. Actually laughed. He declared me dead and stole $87,000. Now he wants relief from paying it back because he's old? That's the argument. His attorney is playing the sympathy card. Old man, poor health, already served his time. Let him live his final years without this burden. File opposition. I want a hearing. I want to look him in the eye while the judge denies this. Rebecca, you know the court might grant some relief. He's not going to pay this back realistically. I don't care about the money. I care about the principle. He doesn't get to escape consequences because consequences became inconvenient. File opposition. The hearing happened 6 weeks later. I took a personal day and drove to the courthouse. Dad shuffled in looking every bit his 70 years. Prison had carved him down to something gaunt and gray. His attorney, a different one than trial, made the case for hardship relief. Dad had served his time. He'd shown remorse. He was elderly and sick with diabetes and high blood pressure. Continuing to burden him with debt he couldn't possibly repay was cruel and pointless. My attorney countered methodically. The debt wasn't punishment, it was restitution. It represented real money Dad had stolen from his daughter. His age and health were consequences of his own choices. He'd committed these crimes in his mid-60s, old enough to know better. His inability to pay didn't erase his obligation. The judge asked me if I wanted to speak. I stood. Your Honor, my father wants relief from consequences he earned. He wants to spend his final years unburdened by debt. That's understandable. I wanted to spend my 20s unburdened by having my father declare me dead and steal everything I'd worked for. We don't always get what we want. He says he's shown remorse, but his parole hearing transcript shows he blamed circumstances and family pressure. That's not remorse. That's deflection. Real remorse would be accepting this debt as the natural consequence of his crimes and living with it without complaint. He says the debt is uncollectible. Maybe, but it's also non-dischargeable. It follows him forever. That's appropriate. His crimes had permanent effects on me. The debt should have permanent effects on him. I'm not asking the court to be harsh. I'm asking the court to be fair. He stole from me deliberately. Let him owe me permanently. That's justice. The judge reviewed the file silently. Then he looked at Dad. Mr. Donovan, the court finds insufficient grounds for relief. Your restitution obligation remains in effect. The fact that you can't pay it doesn't eliminate it. You'll continue making whatever payments you're capable of for the remainder of your life. This debt will transfer to your estate upon your death. Any assets you leave behind will be seized to satisfy outstanding balance before any other distribution occurs. Dad's face crumpled. His attorney started to object, but Dad waved him off. They left the courtroom in silence. I stayed for a few minutes, savoring the quiet. The judge had essentially guaranteed that even death wouldn't free Dad from this debt. Whatever he managed to accumulate in his remaining years would go to me instead of whatever relatives still spoke to him. He'd die knowing his crimes had cost him everything. Outside, a reporter I didn't recognize approached. Ms. Donovan, you just won. How does that feel? It feels appropriate. Your father's elderly and sick. Some people think you should show mercy. Some people didn't have their father declare them dead and steal their life. Their opinions are irrelevant. Is there any chance you'll reconcile before he dies? I stopped walking and looked directly at her. My father taught me that actions have consequences, that you can't escape what you've earned. that life punishes people who take shortcuts and betray trust. He taught me those lessons through his crimes and through facing justice for them. I learned well. So no, we won't reconcile. He'll die owing me money and understanding that some betrayals are permanent. That's cold. That's consequences. If you want warmth, don't commit fraud against your daughter. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in years. This hearing had been closure I didn't know I needed. Dad had tried one last time to escape what he'd done, and the system had shut him down completely. He'd spent his remaining years crushed by debt he earned and couldn't escape. That was perfect. That was justice. Kyle stopped making payments after year 5. His wages were still being garnished, but he'd moved to cash-only work to avoid seizure. My attorney filed for contempt. Kyle got sentenced to 90 days for willful non-payment. He served 60 days and emerged even more broken than before. His probation got extended another 3 years for the violation. He'd be under supervision until he was 50. Every choice he'd made since that day in Dad's kitchen had compounded into a life he couldn't escape. 6 years after the trial, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Rebecca, it's Aunt Marie." I should have hung up. Instead, I waited. "Your father's in the hospital. He had a stroke. The doctors say it's serious. I thought you should know." "Why?" "Because he's your father. Because he might die. Because you might regret not saying goodbye." "I won't regret it." "Rebecca, please. I know you're angry. I know what he did was wrong. But he's still your father. He still loves you. He loved himself more. That's why we're here. That's why he's in a hospital bed instead of at Sunday dinner. He chose crime over family. I'm just accepting his choice." "Will you at least come see him?" "No." "What do I tell him?" "Tell him his daughter is thriving. Tell him she bought a beautiful condo and got promoted twice. Tell him she's happy and successful and unburdened by people who betrayed her. Tell him consequences lasted longer than he expected." I hung up. Marie didn't call back. Dad recovered from the stroke partially. According to my attorney's monitoring of public records, he was released to a nursing home after 3 weeks. Medicaid was covering his care since he had no assets. The restitution debt still stood, accruing interest, waiting for him to die so it could consume whatever remained of his estate. I never visited, never called, never sent a card. He'd made his choices. I'd made mine. We'd both have to live with the results. 7 years after the trial, I met someone. His name was David. He worked in medical device sales. We met at a conference in Chicago and talked for 4 hours about everything except work. He was divorced, no kids, baggage handled and put away neatly. We dated carefully at first, both of us wary of rushing. 6 months in, he asked about my family. I told him the truth. All of it. The fraud, the trial, the permanent estrangement. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Do you regret it?" he asked finally. "Which part?" "Prosecuting them. Cutting them off. All of it." "No, not even a little." "David, if I'd let them get away with it, what would that have taught them? That crime pays if the victim loves you enough? That betrayal is acceptable within family? That I value relationships more than self-respect? I don't believe any of those things. So no, I don't regret holding them accountable." He nodded slowly. "My ex-wife cheated on me for 2 years before I found out. When I filed for divorce, her family accused me of being unforgiving. Said I should work it out. Give her another chance. Preserve the marriage." "What did you do?" "I divorced her anyway. Walked away clean. Haven't spoken to her since. Some people thought I was cold. I thought I was sane." I smiled. "We're going to get along fine." We got engaged a year later. Small wedding. Sarah as maid of honor. His brother as best man. No one from my father's side of the family received an invitation. I didn't need their judgment or their discomfort. This was about building something new, not preserving something rotten. Dad died 9 years after the trial. Heart attack in the nursing home. Quick and relatively painless, according to the staff. I received notification through my attorney since I was listed as a creditor in his estate. The funeral happened on a Tuesday. I didn't attend. Let the relatives who defended him mourn him. Let them remember the man they thought he was instead of the criminal he'd proven himself to be. His estate was minimal. The nursing home had already taken most of what Medicaid didn't cover. But there were some items. Personal effects, a few pieces of furniture. The attorney administering the estate contacted me about my restitution claim. After 9 years of sporadic payments and interest, Dad still owed me $41,000. The estate had maybe $8,000 in liquidatable assets. Do you want to claim it? The estate attorney asked. You're the primary creditor. You're entitled to whatever's there. Take it all, every cent. Let his relatives understand that crimes have permanent costs. The $8,000 appeared in my Justice Fund account 2 months later. The remaining $33,000 in debt was written off as uncollectible. I'd never get it. I didn't care. The money had stopped mattering years ago. What mattered was that Dad died in debt to me. His estate seized to partially satisfy what he owed, his relatives understanding that justice outlasted his life. Kyle continued his slow collapse in obscurity. Last I heard, he was living in a trailer park outside the city, still making sporadic restitution payments, still on probation, still crushed under the weight of choices he'd made a decade ago. He'd be making those payments until he was 70 if he lived that long. Probably wouldn't. He'd always been good at self-destruction. Now he had a felony record and court-ordered debt to accelerate the process. I didn't think about them often anymore. They were footnotes in my history. Cautionary tales I sometimes shared with close friends over wine. The time my father declared me dead. The time I sent him to prison. The time I learned that love without respect is worthless. My life moved forward. David and I bought a house in the suburbs. I made senior vice president. We talked about kids but decided against it. We had nieces and nephews we could spoil without the full-time commitment. We traveled. We invested. We built a life based on trust and honesty, and the understanding that some betrayals are unforgivable. Sarah visited one weekend, and we sat on my back porch watching the sunset. She asked the question she asked every few years. Do you ever regret it? Still no. Never? Sarah, I wake up every morning in a house I own, next to a man who respects me, with a career I built through my own effort. Everything I have, I earned, honestly. Can Dad say that? Can Kyle? They stole and lied and betrayed, and they paid for it with years of their lives and permanent consequences. I protected myself. That's not something to regret. That's something to be proud of. I'm proud of you, Sarah said quietly. I don't know if I could have done it. Yes, you could. You just haven't been tested the same way. But if you were, you'd fight back. Because that's what survivors do. We don't accept injustice. We don't forgive the unforgivable. We hold people accountable, and we move forward without them. The sun dropped below the tree line, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere out there, Kyle was probably finishing a shift at whatever warehouse would hire a convicted felon. Somewhere out there, relatives were probably still discussing what a cold person I'd become. Somewhere out there, people who didn't know my story were judging choices they'd never had to make. None of it touched me. I'd protected myself. I'd demanded justice. I'd refused to be erased. My father and cousin had gambled that I'd be too weak or too loving to fight back. They'd lost that bet completely. They'd paid for their crimes with years and debt and permanent consequences. And I'd won. Not just in court, not just financially. I'd won the bigger battle. The battle for self-respect. The battle to demonstrate that some lines can't be crossed without consequences. The battle to prove that surviving betrayal means refusing to excuse the betrayers. I'd started this story declared legally dead by my father. I ended it more alive than ever, thriving while he rotted in the ground and his accomplice rotted in poverty and debt. That wasn't cruelty. That wasn't vindictiveness. That was justice. And it tasted exactly as sweet as it should.